Well. Look at that. This is the last talk for the Indie Game Business March 2023 conference. Once again, thank you to Tripwire Presents. This is going to be awesome. You're going to love this game. We've got Dylan Geldig, and he's the developer of Peglin, and this is a peg-popping post-mortem from a pandemic passion project. I will let Dylan take it away, and I'll see y'all later.
Thanks, Andy. That was awesome. Yeah, as Indy said, this is Peglin, a peg poppin' post-mortem. Just going to kind of jump right into it. I'm going to go pretty quickly, so hopefully they'll post the videos up after and can watch it at like 0.75 speed so that it kind of comes out normal, because we're going to be cramming the entire history of the game's lifetime so far, which is like just over 3 years, into like a 40-minute talk. So it should be a fun one. Like I said, let's just dive right into it. Kind of a general overview. So just an introduction to myself and the game, just to provide some context and, do the big business shilling, very important. Jump right into some analysis. My kind of specialties are on like design, development, and marketing. The game is kind of mostly like a solo project that other people have like come on and joined. So like I was involved in everything, but I haven't done everything myself. Those are my 3 specialties. So that's kind of what we're going to drill into. Just a bit of a summary, the things that I can think of that are like most important for indies to take away from this. And then just a quick, what comes next for us and what does the future kind of look like. So yeah, my name is Dylan Gettig. I founded Red Nexus Games about 8 years ago now. I've been making games for about 10 years. The company has mostly kind of operated on the side of full-time jobs. And I left my full-time job when Peglin really started to like take off. And now most of the team is full-time and we're kind of growing a little bit. We never want to be like a big giant studio, but we do want to reach like a level of sustainability where one person doesn't just have to wear every single hat. As Indy mentioned, like Peglin was very much a pandemic passion project. I was working on a different side project that was like a little more grimmer, a lot harder to find the fun, and did a game jam before the pandemic where we had made Peglin. And so when everything started really locking down, that was kind of the obvious game to like return to. And it really did a good job at like keeping me sane during the pandemic, which has been really nice. So this is Peglin. Some of you have probably seen it before, others maybe not. It's pretty simple to kind of grasp just from like a quick little thing. So you shoot your ball into the pegboard, bounce around. The amount of pegs that you hit is the amount of damage that you'll do to the enemies up top. And we have the kind of map from Slay the Spire. It's very heavily Slay the Spire inspired, because I think they just did an excellent job. And they've solved a lot of design problems that we could then kind of borrow from and then focus on a kind of new possibility space, which has worked really nicely for us. And I've met the developers. They are very, very cool. They did not yell at me for borrowing heavily from their game, which I greatly appreciated. So always something to keep in mind is you don't have to reinvent every single part of the wheel when you're making a new game. And I'll dig into that in a little bit. So here's kind of like some core facts about our results and like, why this kind of worked, why I'm giving a post-mortem on this game being a success instead of one on why it flopped. We released into Steam Early Access almost a year ago now, April 25th, 2022. We specifically priced the game pretty high because we had like a small dedicated community at the time, and we figured that those would be the people that would purchase the game, and we needed to have the funds to complete the game. So we kind of did that, and then also like our team was still very small. I was the only person working full-time at the time. Everyone else was part-time. So we were really concerned about being overwhelmed. And so we wanted to try and spread out the game's like popularity instead of like front loading it. We could have gone the like Vampire Survivors route and priced really low and then bumped that up later. But we were worried, and it turned out rightfully so. We released with 75,000 wish lists on our launch date. We had 62,000 in the like 2 weeks leading up to that before you get into the Steam popular upcoming. But the game just kind of exploded on launch day. It was like a really, really crazy launch day. And so we were expecting like 6,000 sales in that first week, which kind of lined up with some other calculators that we had seen, like 10% of your kind of organic wish lists. And that was the number of players that had already had over 20 hours in our demo. So that kind of made sense to us to, these are the players that are going to be happy to drop the $20. Like they've already gotten a huge amount of content out of the game as it existed. That was 1/3 of the game. So tripling that just kind of made a lot of sense. And that is just kind of not what happened at all. A lot of big YouTubers and streamers came out on day one and just kind of rocketed the game. And then the Steam algorithm kind of took it and ran with it. So we were definitely extremely lucky. We were also kind of blindsided, but we were prepared for it in a couple of different ways, which I'll kind of get into a little later as well. And then it hasn't really slowed down. I mean, it's obviously slowed down past that first 2 weeks, but it still just kind of trucks along. And I think we still have an average of about 800 sales per day, which is pretty mind-blowing to me, just because it's like you always kind of feels like everyone that is going to hear about the game has already heard about the game. But that is really not the case. And if you look at some of the big games in our genre, like there's still a lot of room to go. So it's a really exciting space to be in. So jumping right into it, I'm just going to talk about some of the design elements and kind of what went well and what didn't, things to look out for when working on your own games, and then we'll move on into development and marketing as well. So this also kind of doubles as a bit of a history lesson, just for those that are curious. But Peglin started as a game jam game in October 2019. I knew going into the game jam that I just wanted to play with physics and just make something like Brick Breakery or like Angry Birds. The theme of the jam ended up being fall. And so we took our kind of Brick Breaker idea and flipped it on its head. So this is a GIF of what we had for the original weekend. It was like the Peglin battle system, obviously very, very rough around the edges, kind of fun to look at, but also kind of fun that some of this stuff has just made its way into the full game. It's, the DNA is definitely there. This was our 10th game published to itch.io after we had done the jam and just cleaned up 1 or 2 more things and uploaded it a day or 2 later. And almost right away, we could feel that there was something different about it compared to our other games. The other games would maybe get a lot of playtime if they were part of a Kenny jam or the Game Maker's Toolkit jam, where participants are encouraged to go and visit and play the other games. This one, was a small local jam, so it wasn't attached to any itch.io jam. So it didn't have that initial spike of players, but it had this persistent rolling. And I was trying to find some pictures to kind of show off the metrics that we were looking at. But unfortunately, just like with the other games in our itch.io portfolio, it was just a little too muddy to demonstrate. But just from a kind of intuition level, we could really feel that there was something different with this game. And before we actually started working on it full time, this kind of encouraged us to create a Discord. And we were surprised at, maybe 2 to 3 dozen people joining the Discord, asking for more content, in addition to some friends and family, which, for a jam game, just super, super rare. So there was some kind of early indications that there was something here. At this point, we didn't have any solid, intentions to continue to work on it. It was a successful game jam. It was a lot of fun. The premise, had we continued at that point, was going to be very based on Puzzle Quest. What if instead of the match 3 style, we took this kind of Peggle Pachinko style, and that was kind of what we were aiming towards. So we jumped kind of into the early days. I kind of mentioned that, we saw those metrics. We saw people were definitely interested in the game. That was when we kind of decided, especially with the pandemic kind of ramping up and things closing down around us, this was maybe 4 months after the game jam. So we're looking at February, March 2020. We decided to kind of pick this up as a main side project. And, depending on the interest, we had the idea of either making it a small $5 game that we were going to have done in around 6 months, and it was just going to be one area with like very minimal, you know, no classes, no like expanded content or anything. But we also had the kind of Slay the Spire 3-act structure to kind of fall back on, which we had some rough plans for if the game was, you know, finding an audience and like resonating with people. We had some flexibility in our scope depending on how popular the game ended up being. Well, prototyping at this phase, we found out pretty early on that like an RPG wouldn't really match what we personally were looking for. We wanted like really crazy synergies and combinations that would let the player just like completely explode the game. And if you're designing like an 8-hour RPG, you have to be, you know, so careful about your power curve because you don't want somebody just like cruising through the last like 5 hours and not having any challenge or entertainment or anything. So we decided pretty early on that like, you know, a roguelike would match a lot better. Hey, you can come in, you can build your crazy deck, you can collect all these crazy relics. Doesn't matter if you like blow past the last half of like a 40-minute or an hour run. That's just kind of a fun little victory lap. And then you get to like start a new one and see if you can pull off the same thing or something similar. Around this stage, we were starting to release demos into digital Steam events, and YouTubers were already starting to pick it up, which was intimidating, but very, very, very useful for the game. Not only from us being able to watch their videos and see, you know, what needs tutorialization, what are they getting stuck on, but also for their audiences joining our player base and providing like regular active feedback. That was really, really exciting. The game just kind of had a certain like, you know, je ne sais quoi. It was really like entertaining to watch somebody else play it, especially with like the navigation at that stage, which was in the game where, you know, you have to actually bounce your way through the pegboard to land where you want to go. There are certain things that increase like the unpredictability, but still feel fair. And I have a slide on like the streamability of a game, and so we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But I just wanted to touch on like, you know, early on, it was clear that people were interested in what was going on here. So there's the path to early access. This lasted about 2 years. So from, you know, roughly March 2020 to that April 2022 date. We had no development budget. You know, we maybe coughed up a few $100s here and there to apply to various online events, like a few $100 like over the course of the year. You know, a lot of things had like maybe $15, $20 application fees. Obviously, some of them were not worth it. Others were worth 10,000 times that. So make of that what you will. You kind of have to learn which ones are worth it and which ones aren't. So yeah, we worked on the side of full-time jobs. This was definitely starting to become pretty stressful towards the end until I went full-time. You know, you're sitting there at a day job and you're just seeing like Discord pings come up, and it's like your community is kind of growing and kind of needs like a little bit more attention and a little bit more engagement at that time. So that was pretty stressful. That was definitely like a little rough time in development wise, but it was still very fun. Like having that community, by the time you get off your full-time job, you know, motivation's running a little low, you're tired, and then you boot it up and there's people like excited about your game. They're like gushing about how much fun they've had. Like that was super useful for just like getting right back into it and kind of working another like 3 or 4 hour shift on most nights. And again, because of the pandemic, we were kind of able to do that. You know, there wasn't family get-togethers, there wasn't a lot of other obligations that you might normally have. And then, like, you know, my partner and I were living together, but we don't have kids and didn't have any pets. So there was definitely an aspect of kind of the stars aligning to make the amount of development with no cash flow possible. But I guess that's just, you know, luck of the draw. We did specifically kind of carve this space for ourselves at the beginning of the pandemic, knowing that it would be kind of good for our mental health. So definitely some deliberate choices there, and then a whole lot of luck, which I think is probably going to be like the byline on the Peglin biography is just, you know, there's always going to be a whole lot of luck. In summer of 2021, we were selected into the PAX 10, and then Yogscast picked us up like a week or two after. I don't know if they saw the game there or if it was just the game was kind of starting to bubble into something new. That was like lighting a rocket. That really changed the trajectory of the game. And I think we went from about 2,000 wish lists to about 15,000 or 2,000 or 20,000 pretty dang quickly. And I put my like notice in after the game had passed 8,000, kind of in that little upwards trajectory. Yeah, that was pretty satisfying. Do recommend if possible. I was working in the games industry as well, but working on like mobile games that I wasn't super passionate about. I was working as just an engineer, and I had a team that wasn't very receptive to design feedback. You know, even though I was spending like so many of my evenings and weekends like playing with game design. So that was like a very big vindictive moment. Yeah, that always fun to be able to do that. And even better, you know, when the game actually becomes profitable and you can continue to be a full-time indie, because anybody can kind of storm out of their job, but you have to be pretty lucky again to continue doing that. The last important thing before we move on here is that we were treating our demo at this point almost as if it was a live service game. Like streamers would come in and pick it up, and we would catch their feedback and implement bug fixes, add more content. They would kind of come back like a week or two later to see the new content. And it was definitely like really entertaining to kind of iterate on that. And we did that, you know, all the way up to our early access launch. And I think this is really important for like a first time development team. And this wasn't our first game. We have one other commercial game on Steam from like 5 years ago, 6 years ago. But not being super nervous when we hit that like release to public button really went a long way towards our launch week not being like immensely stressful, because we had already been doing like regular releases at least once a week for like the prior like, you know, 5 or 6 months at that point when I had left my job and like really had gotten into the swing of things. And I think that just went a really long way towards like our confidence and our polish in the game. You know, if something needed a hot fix, it wasn't this huge, big, scary thing that we had to do because we'd done dozens and dozens of releases at that point. And Steam itself is really good as like a distribution platform. Like obviously that's kind of what they do, but like even if your game isn't ready to go public yet, if you give your like friends and family playtesters those closed keys, you can distribute builds to them just by using that system. And that's really good practice for when you're distributing that to, you know, thousands to hundreds of thousands players down the line. So I really can't recommend that enough. And itch.io does also have really good distribution tools. Their like Butler upload automation system is really, really good. So if you're not at the stage where you think you're going to want to drop that $100 on like Steam to get those tools, you can definitely do that with itch.io as well. So one of my last little points here on game design is that genre combinations are super risky. You know, clearly Peglin is like a combination of two very disparate genres, like physics puzzlers and roguelike deck builders. You know, we can call it luck, we can call it some design on my design skills on my part, probably a lot of both. But we managed to appeal to that like entire Venn diagram more or less. But you have to be really careful because it's very easy to like just appeal to that middle section. And depending on which genres you're combining, that might be almost non-existent, right? Like if you're appealing to people that really like turn-based things and you're adding in like action mechanics, you have to be very, very careful about that sort of thing. That being said, genre combinations like can be your entire hook, right? We have a lot of people that pitch Peglin just as like, they took Peggle and they mixed it with Slay the Spire, which is very true. And people that know what those games are get intrigued pretty quickly. That's a pretty juicy, interesting thing. Crypto the Necrodancer did this really well. Like, if you had told me on paper that they were going to take a rhythm game and combine it with like, a roguelike, which is, usually like a traditional roguelike in this case, slower, thinky, I would have thought they were insane. But that team is very, very good at what they do. Ryan Clark knows his stuff marketing wise. Highly recommend looking up some of the videos that he was doing back when he ran the Clark tank. Yeah, I'm super happy that it worked out for them, and especially with the Nintendo crossover later. But you do have to be very, very cautious that you don't like trap yourself a little bit. So design-wise, what kind of went poorly? We didn't have a ton of experience making this style of game before. Like, I've never really made a roguelike before. And one of the things that kind of came to bite us is that as we were treating that like first demo area, that Act 1, as an open alpha, we're iterating heavily, we're collecting feedback, we're really balancing everything. We ended up with like a very nice, tight, polished demo, but that was only 1/3 of the game. And when it came time to expand that to encompass all 3 areas, the power curve for the player was like really messed up. And so in the month, like that 2 to 4 weeks before launch, when we're really just we finished all the content, now we're coming in and we're like balancing everything out. We had to really squash that power curve down so that you were getting it over the span of like an hour rather than over the span of 20 minutes. And to a lot of players, that looked like nerfs, and they were like really, really unhappy. And we had the potential for like a really kind of nasty, disastrous launch. But I'm thankful that, because so many streamers and YouTubers kind of came out and picked up the game on day one, and, we sent out a lot of keys as well, obviously, and showed it off that it did actually work. I think that kind of mitigated that for us. But that is something that, could have gone catastrophically wrong. If most of our player base just kind of thought that we had messed up the game and just it was awful and terrible at that point, this thing could have entirely fallen on its face, which is always an interesting thing to think about. The next one is something that, we've been struggling with for a while and have kind of just come to terms with the fact that like Peglin is never going to be as like tight and perfect and like I don't know how good is like Slay the Spire feels. Like, everything just feels like so well balanced and so well thought out. Because by the core nature of the pachinko aspect, your shots can range in damage from like 0, like you literally hit no pegs, to like tens of thousands. And we've had some combinations in the game that get into the millions. And we usually try to squash those down unless it's like a crazy combination of relics and orbs that is just like absolutely perfect. We don't want like 2 things to just synergize together to blow that out, because then that's obviously like the only dominant strategy. And we'd like to have like 7 to 10 dominant strategies for the higher levels, and then on the lower levels, we want almost anything to be able to cobble together as long as it has like any kind of mild synergy at all. But yeah, it has been quite difficult for us to balance. That has been something that's been a little tricky for sure. For development, I don't have too much to talk about on this. If you look at Peglin, you can see that it's a pretty simple game. I put together a tutorial on like how you make the pachinko stuff. That takes like 20 minutes to follow through. And then obviously we've just been stacking on like all sorts of fun little smaller pieces. But I'll talk about some of our tools and some of the things that worked well and didn't work well for us. Yeah, so we'll just jump right to it. These screens are going to look familiar to a lot of people, I'm sure, but it's a game that's built in Unity. We use Trello for all of our project management, and I use Trello for game design as well. I find it's just a good way to break down like a ticket can hold a lot of information. You've got checklists. You can link to other tickets if you want like epics and individual like tasks. And then obviously quite easy to like lay it out in a timeline and like have it as like, this is what needs to be done for the next update. Here's what's testing. Our artists have a column for like stuff that's been done and ready for developer to hook up. So that's worked out pretty well for us. The development of Peglin, aside from the original game jam, has always been fully remote. So lots of Discord, lots of just like chatting and calls and cooperating that way. Here's the full list for those that are curious. So we use a lot of Unity assets. I'm a firm believer that like the effort that you put into a project is not equivalent to the end experience that users get. That took me a long time to learn, but I'm at the point now where like if we can take like shortcuts that let us focus more on content and polish and user experience, like I will take them in a heartbeat. So we use things like the dialogue system for Unity, which is excellent. I2 localization, I can't recommend heavily enough. Rewired for our controller input is just fantastic. And I'm sure there's a handful of smaller ones that I'm not thinking of off the top of my head. And I use Rider as an IDE. If you haven't tried it, I can recommend it very highly. It's a little pricier than most other IDEs, but it saves me enough time to easily be worth it, especially if you have any like IntelliJ experience in your repertoire, then you'll jump right into it. For art, we use Sprite for all of our pixel art and Adobe Illustrator for all of our promo art. Trello, as mentioned before, Git, for obvious reasons. Yeah, that's all been worked really well for us so far. Obviously, Unity isn't perfect, but no tool is. So if you have something that will let your team get to like a shipped game, I would do that and then look at switching tools, in your next game's prototype phase. I see too many indies that kind of get like halfway through like a year development project. So they've been working on a game for like 6 months. And then they're like, I don't really like this engine. It's time to switch over to something else. But they kind of do that a few times and never really end up with anything. So you definitely want to avoid that, right? Like the biggest thing as indies that we can do is just get things out there. And I'm not saying stick with one tool forever. My career started in Flash. I've already seen the death of like my biggest development platform. But there's a time and a place for when to switch tools. And I think you have to be pretty deliberate about that. Core development techniques that we had kind of never tried before and have used pretty heavily in Peglin. Scriptable objects, it took me ages to really figure out what they are, but once you know, they're really not that complicated. And we actually use that as a pattern to replace singletons, which lets us do a lot of really neat things like having scenes that don't need an init scene beforehand to get everything set up. The scriptable objects all kind of take care of that themselves, and they're just assigned as references. And if we want to like subclass, like in Peglin, say our deck manager, and have one that does like special debug behavior, we can just create another scriptable object for it and then assign that into like our debug scenes, which is really cool. I'm sure also some people are going to cringe at this because it's not performant, but for indies, we usually don't have to care about that so much. Computers are kind of made to play these big AAA games. We have a lot of leeway. So we use delegates kind of all over the place. And the observer pattern is something that I've become pretty fond of, where manager classes and everything don't need to have direct information about things that are kind of underneath them. They just are like receiving these messages for when important things happen. And that's worked really well for us for being extensible. And again, like having scenes in the game that you can just jump into and start testing immediately without having to like go through all of the init stages of your game and then load into a particular scene. So that's been really, really helpful for us. This next one is kind of business oriented. I kind of chucked it under development for like, it's the development of the game. The original Game Jam team, we just had some like loose text chat arrangements for like, we'll take X% and put X% or Y% aside. We did get those solidified into actual contracts after the game had made some money, because it's really hard to drop a couple $100 on contracts when you don't have any money. This did work out for us. This is not legal advice by any means. I imagine there are other scenarios when it would not have worked out very nicely. But the kind of one thing that I want to touch on here is like, make sure your contracts cover everything that you can possibly think of. And for us, like, we went with a lawyer that isn't particularly game dev specific, and I think our contracts could have probably been a bit more comprehensive, especially when dealing with like the revenue share nature. So that's definitely something to think about. Yeah, it's a tough one to bring up, because the game jams, you don't want to be sitting there spending the Friday afternoon writing up these contracts. But I would really think about like some kind of agreements, so that if some people want to take the game to a commercial state later, that they have a way to do so without the other people kind of being anchors if they're not interested in also jumping in wholeheartedly. So what went poorly development-wise? My biggest regret is that we just didn't know how popular the game was going to be, so we didn't build in any modding, which is very sad to me. There are a lot of like talented modders in our community that have like decompiled the game and then have added things to it that way, and have like worked in mod managers. I am like immensely grateful to them. I think they're incredible. But I do wish that we had just like built in the ability to like add orbs, relics, enemies, etc. Because I would love to see what our players would create if we had given them the tools to do so. But just the way the game was built, it was built for like us to develop quickly, not to be extensible and like have external data being read in. So for Peglin 2, that is something that we would look at for sure. And then some parts of the game are quite brittle. There's a lot of like little bugs that kind of happen to us repeatedly, just from like these Unity UIs, and you're kind of enabling and disabling things to like tweak them visually. And then if you don't like leave them in the correct configuration, you end up just like you load into the screen and the UI doesn't work, and you have to go, and it's just annoying. It's just kind of fiddly. And I don't know if this is like stuff that we should be doing better versus just waiting for the new Unity UI systems, which who knows when those will come out, if ever. So yeah, there's some little fiddly things, but other than that, I mean, development has been pretty smooth. We really prioritize like making the game fun to work on, and it really has been. It's pretty easy and quick for us to jump in and like test out new content and get that out to players, which has been really, really important. From marketing side, I think this is one of the things that Peglin has been the luckiest with, or has seen the most success with. So we'll kind of jump into that. I have already given like a full talk in the past couple of months for Roguelike Celebration, like strictly about marketing. So if there's anything that I kind of glaze over that you're curious more about, I would just give that a quick YouTube search, and it should pop up. With a lot of indies that are just getting started, I find like they think that marketing is like a dirty word. Like it's just like you're doing a disservice. You're out there shoving flyers in people's faces and making people uncomfortable. It really shouldn't be. Like there are players out there that are like actively looking for games, right? Like they're out there hunting for something to play, and you being in the right place for them to see your game, like that is mutually beneficial. That is a good thing. If you're out there and you're like pushing your game into places where people are not looking for it, and you're getting like bad responses, then you're probably you're in the wrong place, I would say. Like we've tried a lot of like Reddit marketing in the past and Twitter marketing in the past and all that stuff, and just like had no success, because you're trying to just kind of push the game into places where people just aren't actively looking for it, and you're not really helping anybody there. This is also something that, this was, like I said, our 10th itch.io published game. I wouldn't say that we like ran full marketing campaigns for those, but you share it on Twitter, you share it in Reddit, you learn little things as you're doing that. You learn like where people are going to be more receptive and where they're going to be less receptive. Buy an ad, you get out of here. So I do recommend doing that as well. Like when you're making these game jam games, when you're completing these full projects, like go the full circle with them. Like set yourself a little challenge. Like, can I get like 100 plays on my itch.io browser game? Sometimes that's super easy. Sometimes that is extremely difficult. But it kind of sets up for when things might start to scale up. You'll at least have that kind of base knowledge. So I think that's really important. Next major point here is that marketing changes like so quickly. Like it's just such a rapidly evolving thing. I would say that it actually like it changes faster than game development itself. I've seen the rise and death of Flash, but I've been using Unity for like the past 6 years now. Still looking pretty stable so far. In 6 years, like game marketing has changed dramatically. And obviously COVID has not helped with this. That has really thrown a wrench in the works. But in some ways, it's been pretty good for indies. And we'll talk about that a little bit. But yeah, the change is very fast, and you have to just kind of iterate and like honestly like have fun with it. Like if marketing is such a chore for you that it's really like actively painful, you're probably not doing something right. Unless you are seeing amazing results and it's still painful, in which case I'm so sorry. But most of the time, like if you're having fun with it and you're out there, sharing your game with people that are also excited about seeing your game, like it can be a lot of fun. It can be one of the most rewarding parts of the whole game development process. I learned like almost all of what I know from these two people. I kind of mentioned Ryan Clark earlier as well, but he's a little less active in like sharing information now, which is fair. He's got his own stuff to focus on. But yeah, Chris Zukowski and Simon Carlos, like they both just have like really incredible newsletters and content that comes out. And the kind of analysis they do is just like super helpful. And especially in Chris's case, how to market a game there. He's got a Discord where people will share like all the upcoming events and like deadlines, when to apply, how much it costs, was it worth it? And that is just like so immensely helpful. If you are like serious about being like a full-time indie, like you have to know marketing in some form. And I can't recommend these two enough. So the biggest things for us, marketing-wise, like by more than anything else at all, streamers and YouTubers, and then participating in digital events. So for streamers and YouTubers, like we just owe absolutely everything to them. It is a symbiotic relationship. It's like they get a fun game to make content for, but we just get like all of their audience looking at our game. And like we would not be doing this full time if it wasn't for them. I can like almost say that for sure. We noticed early on that like when we spent time adding content to the game, it was like way more impactful than us like sending out tweets and like making sure that we were doing that like kind of manual marketing. Because anytime we released an update, like a ton of YouTubers would come and like make another video, like what's new, what's in here. And that is a really, really, really good place to be as an indie developer if you don't like marketing. So you definitely, you have to get the ball rolling to get there. But once you're there, that is really, really awesome. So as I mentioned, like, I sent out like hundreds of keys, especially in the lead up to the early access release. I'm pretty sure I got marked as like spam for a while, which kind of sucked, but I think my email is back to normal now. And that was like, I was not using a mailing list or anything like that. These were like manual emails, but I was working off a template, which I guess started to trip some spam filters. So that was a little funny. I don't know how to avoid that, but try to avoid that if you can. Yeah, they need to find your game first. Digital events were definitely the way to do that during like the heart of the pandemic. Still an excellent way to go. I know that Valve is kind of tampering down on like Steam featuring digital events, which is a big shame. But it's still like participating in these, getting the word out. That is where you're going to kind of cultivate the original player bases that are then going to like suggest the game to their favorite streamers. That's where those early streamers are going to pick up the game, which tends to kind of snowball, assuming your game has that replayability, which we'll get into in a little bit. Apply to just like anything and everything that matches your game, unless it's got a big price tag on it. You got to be a little careful there. Some of them I've seen like $100 application fees, but most are kind of 10 to 20. If you're working on a team, talk with your team about like, what are they okay with spending here? Because, we were spending like a few $100s a year, which in retrospect is kind of nothing. But if the game had made nothing, it's like that's an unfortunate, cost for people that are just working day jobs and trying to get by. Before you have that marketing budget, that can feel pretty intimidating, but it can absolutely be worth it. If you're really serious about your game, I would try and set something a little bit aside to be able to do that, because you're investing so much of your time in your game. It's a big shame if you're not, kind of capitalizing on everything that will get it in front of people. In front of those players that want to find your game, that want to play your game. This is the big braggy slide, but I really just have this in here for like, these people didn't like find Peglin and be like, yes, seal of approval, great game. Like all of these represent like the applications sent in for that actual event, and like 10 to 15 applications for other events that didn't go anywhere. Like when I was too tired to work on the game, I would look for events and just like see what's going on out there. As mentioned before, like Chris's Discord, excellent source for finding things that might otherwise fly under your radar. And as an indie developer, like I would get really comfortable filling out Google Forms. Have like some marketing snippets for your game that you can like just move in there, so you're not rewriting it every time. But you're going to be filling out a lot of forms. Like that's just how it's going to go. And the last little piece of marketing here, other than the what went poorly, just streamability of your game. Peglin, really falls in here. Yeah, it was really a game that I just wanted to make for myself. I wanted something lighthearted, replayable, fun, and bouncy. But there's just a lot of elements that worked really well for like watching somebody play that game. So that is something that just definitely really worked well for us. And it wasn't really something I was like planning for originally. But once we started to see that happen, we kind of, leaned into it, cleaned up things that would maybe be a little less, bit more confusing for viewers. The bouncing to navigate to where you want to go to is like such a diversive feature. Like some players just absolutely hate it. But when you're watching somebody play and they just like have this fluke bounce that sends them the wrong way and they throw their hands up in like disbelief, like those moments are just so fun to watch. The moments where like somebody hits a chain of bombs and their relic triggers at the right time and they end up with like 30,000 damage and there's this big cheer and it's just exciting. Like those moments are fun to watch, right? So identifying what those are in your game and leaning into them, really, really important. Hard to find content. If a YouTuber can make a video just solely about like, hey, how do you get this relic that people are wondering about? Like that's more content that they can kind of look into your game for. You really, if you're thinking about it from their perspective while you're adding stuff, you can come up with some really neat synergies between you and the streamers. And that can go a really, really long way. What went poorly marketing wise? Social media did next to nothing. To date, I think like between myself and the Twitter account, we have like 3,500 followers. That's like 2,500 more than we had before we started the game. I think we had a total of 1,000 between the two of us, if that. Your accounts, from what I've seen, unless you're really out there like memeing it up and like working those engagement fields, you're really gonna get big from your game, not vice versa. I've seen devs that have like 100,000 followers from like whatever they've been doing, that launch a game and just have like next to no engagement because people are following them just for the tweets and the content, and aren't interested in the game themselves. So if you're looking at it where it's like, I've got to build a big Twitter and then I can release a game, don't do that. Please don't do that. Yeah, focus on what is working for you. Try out those little games. Find out where people are excited to learn about your game, and lean into that instead of trying to like build a following with memes and then trying to convert that. I'm sure there are success stories out there. I'm sure there are, but I wouldn't say that it's like the normal thing. Traditional games press, this is something that we're kind of trying to turn around a little bit, just to kind of invest in our like future games, just to kind of get that brand awareness out. But to the actual success of Peglin, almost nothing. I will give a shout out to like John Walker, who would regularly like take like over the front page of Kotaku whenever like the US had holidays. And he would just like feature indie games. He would just do these like big indie cover show kind of things. That was really, really cool. And that definitely had like a little bit of an impact, but like, I wouldn't say that's the big reason. Maybe some streamers found the game that way. It's hard to say, but like if you were to remove that entirely, I think we'd be in like a pretty similar spot. But it is always, it's good to see. It's good for motivation and all of that. And then the other thing that went poorly is like once the ball like really got rolling, it was just like this behemoth. It was crazy and like so unpredictable. But it took a long time to kind of get there. We were happy with the metrics that we were seeing compared to like our itch.io games. But if I was to just be an indie dev and like work on this game for a year and then release it, like if that was a full-time thing, I would have been pretty worried around that like 6 to 8 month mark, not really seeing a lot of movement. Like I think in that first year, we maybe had 1,000 wish lists, and like that is a tough thing to launch a game on. But we were happy enough with like the engagement that we were getting like in our Discord and with players and streamers actually paying attention to the game, even if it wasn't leading to those like concrete numbers at the time, that we felt decent about like putting a bit more into the game. And especially because we were working on it on the side of full-time jobs for fun, it ended up working out. But there was no like immediate, just like we tweet about the game and boom, 10,000 wish lists. We know it's going to be successful. So it's hard to tell if like Peglin would have been made in a different environment, which is a little bit tricky. Some other things that went poorly. Alpha Beta Gamer is like an awesome YouTuber that just like features like really experimental up and coming games. I think there's like a perfect time where we could have jumped in there and it would have worked really well to kind of speed up that rolling. We kind of missed it. By the time I was like reaching out to him, the game had already been picked up by a bunch of people and it kind of missed his window, even though I think it was still experimental enough, but I think that's okay. Steam forums got super toxic really quickly, and like it took me like a week to just be like throw my hands up and be like, no, these players are not interested in the game. They're literally just like, I call them players, but like I don't think any of them bought the game. They were literally just in there like trolling, harassing, and they would like make threads like full of like swear words and all this kind of like horrible stuff, and you would delete it, and then you'd get accused of like censorship. And it was like really they were like just out there to cause trouble. And I finally just like said like no, like the Steam forums, people are not like interacting in good faith. Unfortunately, I'm sure there's a lot of good like reports and stuff in there, but I cannot look at it for like my mental health for the sake of like working on the game. No way. And you can actually reach out to Valve and be like, hey, my Steam forums are a bit of a mess right now. Can you like watch those for a week or two so that I don't get like the brunt of having to manage all of that? And that was something that we did a little too late. And it definitely like made that launch week, which should have been like really exciting and fun, and us focused on like, responding to real player issues, turned it into a bit of a mess and like left kind of a bad aftertaste in my mouth. But thankfully we figured that out, decently quickly and kind of moved on from there. And every other community, like our Reddit community, the emails that I get, our Discord, wonderful, just fantastic community, so fun to make a game with. Steam forums, for whatever reason, bad gamer land. Don't recommend looking at the Steam forums. And then the last one is like we left a lot on the table that we could have been doing. We dabbled in TikTok a little bit. I think we have one TikTok that has like 40,000 views. The rest have like 800. So I think if we had kind of like really invested a bit more time into that, we could have seen some really good results. The problem is that nobody on the team like loved doing it. So it was just kind of fell off to the side, which isn't ideal. Just into some kind of misc points before we kind of get into the summary and wrap things up. Community localization has worked pretty well for us, kind of varying results across the different languages, but we also have languages that we wouldn't have paid a localizer to do. So it's kind of some interesting pros and cons. For simplicity's sake, in the future, like just go for a localization studio if you can afford it. A Chinese publisher, we've partnered up with IndieArc. That has worked really well for us. China is our third biggest market behind the US and Germany. That's been really awesome, and I'm hoping that it will kind of pay off a bit more once we release on mobile, which in China, you need an ISBN number. You need to be working with a Chinese publisher anyway. The money, it's been exciting, like, woo, yay, we did it. It's caused like roughly as many problems as it's solved. It's nice having that stability. Unfortunately, with the public facing nature of our industry, my friends and family have a rough idea of how much money I make, which like ranges wildly. Some of them are just so far off. Yeah, that's been interesting. It won't solve all of your problems, is all I'm saying. My dream for the past 10 years is to make a successful game. I definitely had a moment where like we hit that 100,000 like sales mark, which was something I'd always dreamed of. And I'm kind of sitting there like, now what? That was in the first 2 weeks of early access. That was kind of my big goal, my big dream. The game still needs a lot of development. The game is just getting started, just entered early access. And I hadn't really ever sat down. I've been so busy running from like one milestone to the next that I'd never really sat down and thought about like what came next or what that would mean or expanded what that goal would be. So I felt a little lost shortly after that. And thankfully, we, with a super engaged player base and everything, like they were a great source of motivation. But yeah, that was a bit of a wake-up call. It was just kind of, you have these dreams and you've been working on it for so long, and then it happens, and what happens next? I don't want to use this slide as like a big boasty slide. I want to include that in the post-mortem of like, there are things that, maybe you should plan for and be prepared for, because I was not. And I kind of wish I'd used an alias. The game has kind of reached a threshold now. Like we're coming up on 400,000 sales, and like that's a lot of people to like see your name in the credits and like be able to find out roughly where you live from other information. There was a Phil Fish podcast came out like a few weeks ago that he kind of talks about how one of the reasons he left the industry is because it's like having a sewer pipe like directly into your living room. Just you get like all this big internet opinions, and like people are so toxic online when they would never say the same things to your face. Yeah, I kind of wish I'd used an alias. If you're early in your career, maybe something to think about. It's a tough one. I could probably do a whole talk just on that, but this is me. I didn't, so here I am. My kids will have to deal with this one day, maybe. Key takeaways: game jams are incredible. Do every game jam you can. They are so good. Don't be afraid to make small games, but have that backup plan. Peglin was going to be like a 6-month, $5 project. When we saw that interest start to grow, 800, 1,000 wish lists, even if it wasn't that much, it was enough to know that there was like a lot of potential there compared to the other games that we had seen, which is why releasing small games is good, because you kind of have a lot to pull from. When there's an outlier, even if it doesn't look crazy to like, a team full of suits that probably would have nixed the game pretty quickly. More games that you release, you'll have that radar. Yeah, Peglin was never meant to be like this crazy successful thing. I did not sit down and like design the pop song that's gonna like rocket to the charts. I just made a small game for me, and it's just grown past that. Streamers for indies are like easily the best form of marketing that we have, but it can change very, very quickly. So be agile, be adept, keep your ear to the ground, be friendly to people around you. You never know, who will tell you what the next big thing is, who you'll be working with. We've been interacting with a ton of other indie devs, and they've been super, super helpful. Like there's no way we would be where we are without them. It's a small industry, be kind. Bundle with other indies if you can. When we partnered with RoundGuard, who, clearly got there before us, but we're very friendly about it. When we were in a bundle with them, they actually had their biggest sales day since launch day, which was really, really cool that we could kind of come back and like kind of build that up together. And we also saw like a pretty huge boost. It was just like the act of bundling up together was this big press beat of like, look, they're not enemies, they're actually friends. It was really, really neat. What's next for us? We're still working on Peglin, like really actively. We've got a big update coming soon, and then console and mobile ports will be later this year. And then eventually we'll probably see some more games from myself and Red Nexus, hopefully. But right now, all we can think about is Peglin. We're extremely grateful to our community We don't want to like jump that ship too quickly. $20 was a lot to ask. We want to make sure that the game is worth that and more. So Peglin for the foreseeable future, and then eventually more small games, ideally. Thank you. I didn't quite talk quickly enough, but I did leave a few minutes for questions. So thank you all so much, and we'll see how many we can answer here.
Dylan, that was absolutely perfect. It was, yes, it was a fire hose of knowledge, but it's all good knowledge. And plus, these things are, online forever, so people can go back and watch it, immediately. So, and I always love hearing these stories. And what I want to know was, when did you, check your dashboard and go, oh shit? Now,
it was like 4 hours later, I would say. Like it was like we didn't, I was used to checking the wish list once a day because those only update once a day, but the sales update like hourly. And that was when things really started to just get kind of crazy. And then, yeah, we hit like top sellers either later that day or the next day. And we were nestled between like the Steam Deck and like Elden Ring. And that was a big like, oh my God, what is happening moment. That was a little scary, honestly.
So, I mean, when it came to, and I was having a conversation with a friend of mine at the same time, when it came to, okay, we've obviously got something that's going to be bigger than we thought it was going to be. What were your first steps in like ramping up? Or was there any, or did y'all just go, we can do this?
Oh, there were for sure. Especially with that kind of the Steam experience that we had, because that kind of started a few days before release, because people were like complaining about the price. That you check their post history and they're just complaining about the price of every indie game. So like, don't take too much stock into that if you're seeing the same things. But that that was really flaring up because we had a lot of passionate players that would come in and like defend the game a little more vehemently than they should have been. They're also making comments that kind of require the thread to be like locked down. So the first thing we did was like hire a community manager. It was like, I'm not going to be able to like work on the game and deal with all of this. So that was a huge, big thing. And then the rest of the team, after seeing the day one numbers, I was still the only person working full time. They were all pretty worried. They left their jobs like that day, put in their notice, and we're like, no, this is a full-time thing now. So yeah, launch day, launch week was incredibly exciting for sure. That was something else.
Well, I mean, congratulations. I mean, it is terror when that sort of thing happens, but it's a good kind of terror because everything's going to be fine, at least.
Yeah, you just have to plan for it, really. And that was something that we really didn't focus on.
So, question from Twitch: do you worry at all about giving out keys to scammers or key resellers?
Yeah, I mean, we obviously try to avoid it as much as we can. Something else that I did early on is I filtered out the word curator from my Gmail, because we were just receiving literally like hundreds of spam letters every week. And the curator system, it has good intentions, but was really poorly implemented. And all of these curator requests for Steam curators are requesting Steam keys. They're not asking that you send them through the curator system, which gives them the game directly. They want Steam keys because they're just planning on reselling them. And I'm sure my hit rate hasn't been 100% on identifying like what is a spam and what isn't. Unfortunately, some like well-meaning people are probably getting caught up in like my paranoia. But yeah, there's just so many, especially when your game like reaches, that front page of Steam, that really just like sets the bots on you. And it's been pretty chaotic since then. One thing that I have noticed is there's this like trend on YouTube now where like a YouTuber with like 20,000 followers will request a key, and you click in and you go, and there's a bunch of comments under the video, but none of them have any engagement. There's like no likes or replies. And then you watch the video itself, and it's like not quite a Microsoft Sam, but it's clearly like an AI voice, just like reading like a review of the game over like stock gameplay footage. But we've had like literally like if not like the high dozens, like hundreds of requests from those accounts. So they've definitely gotten a lot trickier since the last time I released a game 6 years ago. But yeah, you do have to be careful.
So we're seeing basically people creating chat GPT, YouTube pages and using AI to go through and, well, that's comforting. That's good. That's good to
Yeah,
know.
and on first blush, they look really legit, right? If you look at them, it looks like, oh, this is a YouTuber with like 25,000 followers. All of their videos get like 10,000 views, and they have like, over 100 comments. Like those are all good signs. And I don't know what kind of tripped me off on the first couple, but something had a bad smell to it.
Yeah.
And then, you watch the video itself, and it's just like, yeah, this isn't a real person doing this.
This is that random voice off of TikTok.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right. So on the Discord, someone says, have your mind ever been completely blown by watching someone live stream the game? It's like, oh my God, you're actually crushing it.
Oh, so many times. Yeah, you see some of the crazy combinations, and it's like you kind of thought that maybe it would work, but they're using it in a way that you didn't quite expect, and now they're in the like low millions of damage on every shot. It's like you think it would be fun, and like it is super fun the first time you do it, but like if that becomes the thing where you're just doing that every single run, like it's actually pretty boring and samey. It's like playing other games with God mode on, right? So unfortunately, like we do have to nerf, and we do have to like break those combinations at least into more pieces so that it happens less frequently. But the nice thing about a roguelike is like, if it takes like 10 pieces of Exodia to make this crazy game-winning combo, like that's fine. Like if you have the stars align and you have these big crazy runs, like that's actually something that like we want in the game. We just don't want it to be like obtainable every single time.
Yeah, you need those runs every now and then when you can just completely stack everything and everything's complementing everything else. But yeah, with a roguelike, you're not guaranteed to get that every single time.
Yeah,
Anyway.
just the big palate cleansing revenge runs.
Yes,
those are
exactly.
always so sad.
It's like dessert, kind of. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, with the emphasis is often on quality rather than quantity, you previously mentioned that some of the things you committed to were beneficial while others were not. Would you recommend foregoing the fees and conducting more thorough research, or simply diving in and evaluating the results?
Yeah, that's a really tough call. And we didn't dabble with like ads or anything, which are really like really results driven and really hardcore to like analyze. In mobile games, it's like you want to figure out your average revenue per player and then pump in like that amount minus a cent for like user acquisition. So you have like really concrete metrics that you can look at. For us, not too many events jump out where like I feel like we were kind of like ripped off or anything. Some events took more time than I would have liked. You fill out the Google form, you're like, yeah, okay, they have my Steam game information, that's awesome. And then they follow up with like, a form that's like 10 pages long and needs all these custom assets, and it's like more in depth than like setting up your Steam page. Those ones I was a little bitter about. But yeah, none of the like money that we spent, I really regret. You just have to be careful because there's just so many events out there. But for big ones like PAX, I think it's between $15 and $25 to apply to be in the PAX 10. And if you like think that your game has a strong chance at appearing in there, like that's worth every penny. And that's like a meal. It sucks if you don't have that marketing budget. Like we absolutely did not. But when we actually got in there, like that, that's like $10,000 of value if you want to actually spend to get in the same place that they provide for the PAX 10. Like it's immense. It's just huge.
So obviously you've been on our server, our Discord server for a while, and the community with all the folks there that are coming in and, trying to get that starting these small studios. What is the single biggest thing you wish you had known beforehand that you know now?
That is a really good question. Yeah, for games, I feel like I fell into it pretty naturally with like falling into game jams and like iterating and just like slowly getting bigger. Like I worked in the industry, mostly doing live service games, which probably like led to that feeling a bit more natural. But like before I got into games, I was attempting to become like an author. I always thought it would be very cool to tell stories, in a linear, non-digital fashion before I made that jump. And, I never worked on short stories. I jumped straight into like trying to write like a novel. I got like 14 chapters in. It was a pretty impressive effort. But then the whole thing just kind of unwound. And by the time I got that far, you're rereading your earlier stuff to ensure stuff is consistent. And your writing has improved so much from just sitting down and putting, pencil to paper, that now you feel like you have to rewrite the beginning. And I see the same thing happen with indie devs a lot. And like it torpedoed my potential writing career. Like that has taken 10 years off of that at least. And thankfully, by the time I got into games, it felt a bit more natural to like make these small things, and game jams kind of teach you that. So just do not try and make like your dream game right off the bat. Scope is such an important thing in our industry, and like finishing things is a skill in and of itself. So even if you were somehow able to make your like indie version of Skyrim that you've always dreamed of, you aren't going to know like where to share that or how to market that or any of those things. Those are skills as well that really need polish and practice and working on.
Man, as an English major in college, I completely feel the whole writing thing and wanting to do the. God, yes, I know.
I wish somebody had pulled me on the shoulder and had told me like, hey, start with short stories, and if you can get stuff out there and published, then you can work your way up. But hindsight is 20/20.
So I mean, but I think it's a really good point, because I mean we've seen games from itch in particularly go on and be successful in mainstream, and it's like we've got your work, and Backpack Hero just came out as well, so we're starting to see more and more of these. And the beauty of it for indie devs is like, if you go and you start selling your game in early access on Steam, you're going to, whether or not you intend to, alienate roughly 50% of the possible publishers that are out there. In 25 years of doing this, and however many years Itch.io has been around, I have never had a publisher tell us, we don't want to publish that game because it's on itch. And so it's a wonderful place to, like you said, test these, test smaller games. Don't try to put, and God, I've seen them too. I know, developers come to us and they're 3 people and it's their first game, and it's like, we're going to do the indie version of Skyrim. And I'm like, no, you're not. There's just not, it's not going to happen. But yeah, I agree with you. I think that's a wonderful way to, get started on a lot of these things. And so I would encourage more people to do it. And also, thanks for, busting that myth of I can do this right out of the gate with, my first game. It's like you said, you've got a long experience in the industry anyway. But I mean, heartfelt congratulations, because y'all killed it on this one. And it's always good to see,
so
good games succeed like that. But yeah, we've kept you here long enough. Folks listening, if you get your ticket, we will send you the deck automatically after the conference. But anything else, Dylan is around on our Discord server. It's discord.gg/indiegamebusiness. And with that, we're done. That was our 13th or 14th. We're starting to lose count at this point in time. Online conference. And that's going to wrap it for a day. There is not going to be a podcast tomorrow, but we will be back next week to help you get ready for GDC. So that's it. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Tripwire. Dylan, keep up the good work, and we'll see you all soon.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me, Jay.